Beyond 3D. Welcome back to another edition this week of Beyond 3D, coming to you from the RPP studios on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, Australia. Quite often when Matt and I research information for a show, it can often take weeks for us to correlate our information and then present to you, our listeners, the absolute best interviews, intelligence, knowledge and data that we can on what is happening in your three-dimensional world that we all inhabit and share. Hence the title of our show being Beyond 3D or Beyond the Third Dimension. This work that we do often involves sifting through mounds of propaganda, science, other interviews and clues, and in doing so we open ourselves up. And we often inadvertently invite into our own personal lives many negative forces that coexist within our world. Tonight, Matt and I wish to present some very unnerving information that we've been sitting on for the past 7 months, since October last year, 2015, when we had the pleasure of interviewing tonight's guest. Our topic of stirring debate is based on the alleged alien race called the Reptilians, and their agenda for humanity as being nothing short of malevolent. Allegedly, they operate beyond the realms of visible light and in a frequency that vibrates on another plane or level that is beyond our own clumsy third dimension. They allegedly hold external control over our minds, our bodies and our souls. Over the years, respected international researchers such as David Icke, Simon Parkes, Miles Johnson, Kerry Cassidy, Peter Maxwell Slattery, Alice Taylor, James Bartley, David Chase, Bill Ryan, and Australian psychologist and Beyond 3D's very own Mary Rudwell, who we spoke to last year, all have had reptilian experiences, and it is these experiences that our guest tonight has expertly crafted into his award-winning documentary. Here is a sample of the trailer for this incredibly brave, collated and informative doco by Chris Turner. Beyond 3D.
They work for us, John. We run the show. It's all an illusion. Nothing you experience here is real. Nothing. None of it.
To think that reptilians even exist, let alone that they're in some way controlling the populace and what's going on, just seems so far out there to the normal person.
The last thing these entities want is to be noticed. They want to be ignored, because if they're ignored, they can get away with it.
The people in my own family and people that I know very well and people who were interested in ufology, when they saw this, either didn't see it or became very upset about it.
The three questions they ask me is, am I going crazy? Is this real? And if it's real, why me?
There are shadow creatures that are genuinely shadow beings. There are jinn that can appear like shadow creatures.
What she then saw was Heath shift into a reptilian form and grow about 2 feet, which is absolutely common in descriptions of this.
The reptilians do have enemies, and there are a variety of beings that have been in conflict with the reptilians for thousands and thousands, indeed millions of years.
We know that the abduction phenomenon does run in families, and the same thing seems to be true for reptilian contact. So you can look at reptilian contact as a facet of the UFO abduction phenomenon, and it suggests a genetic aspect to their interest in us.
She screamed and screamed and screamed as this creature clawed on the outside of the door. And then finally, the guards heard her, who were outside the house. They came rushing in. This was their job, and this creature disappeared.
I think someone has made an effort to enlighten the people so they really know what's going on. Whether it's done for malign, in-your-face purposes, or it's done, at least some of it is done, to wake people up, who knows? It's a frequency war. And these beings would all want us to be in a lower negative vibrational state of hopelessness, of anguish, of fear. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is a big part of their manipulation process, where they instill these negative thought loops in people of hopelessness, of feeling unloved, so on and so forth. And once those thought loops kick in, it's very hard for those people to break out of that, because in the spirit world, thoughts are things, and those thoughts have a negative vibration, a negative connotation to them. We also happen to live in a psychiatric tyranny where we have all these quack psychiatrists and psychologists who are routinely dispensing like psychotropic drugs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which destroy cognitive function and make it easier for people to be taken up as a host.
I don't understand. Why are you here? What do you want?
What do we want? Where did we come from? When did we get here? That's a good question.
Beyond 333D. Matt, they say an artist's work is never completed, only abandoned. And with us tonight, all the way from the United Kingdom, we have a very special guest, writer, producer, and I'm sure by now editor of his amazing documentary, Don't Mention the Reptilians, Christopher Turner. Chris, welcome to tonight's episode of Beyond 3D.
Welcome, Chris.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Like I said earlier, I really appreciate you guys getting in touch, and it is starting to pick up pace with people asking me about this, so that's good.
No, that's fantastic. Hey, the first conversation about creating this documentary to when you expect it to be released, how long has this journey been for you?
How long's a piece of string, really?
I can answer that. It's half its length doubled.
Yeah, and some.
And then some.
Yeah, absolutely. Currently, it's probably, in all honesty, it's probably been at the back of my mind for probably like 8-9 years. But given the taboo nature of it, no one seems to have touched it, which is this is probably, I believe, why I started it. It just seemed that no one would really... I mean, of course, people are writing books and producing literature and a lot of YouTube stuff out there, but no one's really collated all the evidence from all the various sources and put it into one place. So the research part of it is probably on for about 2 years now. But as you guys probably know, the backstory of all this is all the New World Order stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
And the Illuminati stuff, in which I've been in and around that for a lot longer, 6 to 7 years, in some capacity, one capacity or another. So obviously a lot of the guys that I speak to in the past, like David Icke and Max Sarion, have always wrote about the Reptilians and the Archons, and indeed the aliens and the paranormal. And what I've found is that it isn't just the Reptilians, it's everything and more. And this is why the production has got so far behind. Well, I say so far behind. We're a little behind. We're about 7 months behind what was originally one film. But because of the broad spectrum of experiences and the duality of this thing, this is it's just got massive. The whole project has now led to spin-off productions about topics like shape-shifting and the Archons and any number of things that I'm now being asked to look into with other people in this research area who are not necessarily really well known, because what I've tried to do with this project is we've all heard of people like David Icke and James Bartley and Simon Parkes, Michael Sarion, Jordan Maxwell, but there are other researchers that go under the radar that often their voice really never gets heard unless you're skimming the forums like I do, just to look for angles that people aren't covering. And that was really my intention, to give some of the people a voice who hadn't necessarily been heard before.
Excellent. That's fantastic, because I would imagine also that those new people would have had even more newer experiences that were even deeper on a more dimensional level too.
Well, yeah, because what I found is that not necessarily with the reptilian stuff, but because all the New World Order and the Illuminati research is tied into the alien agenda in one way or another. I mean, you can only get so far. I think even people like Alex Jones are now touching on, the more stuff like the archontic side of it.
Don't laugh there, Chris. I actually noticed that myself. I think I started noticing it probably as recent as about 8 months ago. He started touching on things like this and this topic, and it did pick up my notice, and I did mark that because he usually doesn't lean towards that side, that kind of stuff. It's usually all about liberties, and very rarely is it anything to do with extra-dimensional or whatever else it is you wish to label it.
Sure, I mean, I can totally understand, because he's sort of, holding up his end and covering sort of the mainstream angle, if you like. But as I say, I mean, he's been in this for a couple of decades, if not longer.
With Alex Jones, sorry, Chris. With Alex Jones, it's very interesting, because what he is now doing is, you're absolutely right. It is now on his radar. It's on his radar because it is directly affecting him now.
Absolutely, that's a really good point you make there, and he isn't the only one. And I just wonder how many more now are gonna sort of jump on the bandwagon. I mean, that's not a negative term. It's probably something that we should be doing, and that's kind of what I'm doing. But I've been very careful that throughout this production, and any time that I talk about it on forums or in blogs or whatever I do, I always sort of quote the people that I'm working with, and also, as I said to you guys when you contacted me, I'm not a scholar by any means, but the guys what I'm trying to do is make sure that the guys I speak to are, and these are all seasoned veteran sort of researchers and experiences, which is the other thing I wanted to touch on. What the experiences that are involved in the project, which is probably about 70% of them are experiences, they were really keen that there was a balance of researchers and experiences. They were very wary about the project at the beginning, and I can totally understand why that is, because they've had past experiences with mainstream that like to sort of put the tinfoil hat on all this. But that took some work on my behalf, really, to sort of convince these guys that I was pretty serious about it, and that I took it all serious.
No, that's awesome. What are the one or two pieces of information that you've experienced during filming that might have kept you up at night, thinking about the issue a little bit longer than you should have, maybe?
Well, yeah, in the infancy of the research, you get overwhelmed with it, and it is pretty frightening, because you're talking to experiences every day, and what they're going through must be terrifying, and you can't help but, yeah, you do sort of lose sleep at night. I mean, I'm not a great sleeper anyway. I mean, when you're researching a project and planning a project, that keeps you up anyway. But with this sort of information, and you're reading about psychic attacks, and I'm getting a lot of warnings from people and emails from people saying I should be careful what I look into, who I speak to. So of course you get a little paranoid. I mean, that's only natural to do that. Not that I've experienced anything like that directly, but I mean, I have experienced a strange thing that I mentioned on YouTube, a blog on YouTube that kept me up for a couple of days, and that was after I came back from the Isle of Wight. I'd been interviewing David Icke for a couple of days, and I arrived home and I was just checking my emails downstairs on the laptop, and all of a sudden I looked up, and in the front of the room appeared this yellow sort of ball, and it only appeared for a couple of seconds, and at first you do what anyone else would do, you rub your eyes and question yourself, and I was just wondering what the hell is this sort of thing. And then just as I was questioning whether what I'd seen was real, it appeared again, and then it just floated off and disappeared. And that, given that I'd just come back from speaking to David Icke, and given the fact that I've been warned that I may experience strange phenomena in one form or another, that sort of stayed with me for a little bit. But it wasn't a negative experience, it was just a little bit strange, and I haven't ruled out the possibility that it could well be my eyes, but I don't think it was. I think it was a real phenomenon, but I just can't explain it.
There you go. Thank you for that, Chris. Hey, tell us, why don't we mention the Reptilians?
Well, The Don't Mention Reptilians was really a sort of play on words from David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret. I think he has a chapter in there named Don't Mention Reptilians, but it really, it's all about really the taboo about this subject and how, according to researchers like Simon Parkes and David Icke, there's been a census on speaking about not only the reptilians themselves, but anything that represents the reptilians, the very nature of it. And this even goes back to sort of discussing the Archons. I mean, the Archons currently, as you might know, are quite a very popular topic. They're gaining a lot of press in the alternative scene through researchers like David Icke and Harold Corsella. But, I mean, traditionally, that sort of the taboo and the secrecy around the reptilians goes back to sort of like the ancient world as well. And we can see, if we was to look at Simon Parkes' work, he's keen on the fact that they go out of the way throughout history, and he even talks about, I mean, I'm not so sure about this angle, again, it's one of those things I should probably research, but he mentions time travel and the ability to remove themselves from history, where they, may have been at the forefront of things. But, I mean, we can still see it in the Genesis text, and if you look at the ancient Aztecs, you can see representations of the serpent, and the serpent cult, of course, is widely known in sort of like South America. But the ins and outs of it, the very details, everything's very sketchy, and any text that sort of explained it and shone a light on that was hidden or left out of certain books that we need not mention. So it's a very fitting title, and indeed when you mention the reptilians to researchers, even UFO and current alien UFO researchers, some of them get really very uncomfortable about it, about even talking about it. They'll talk about the Greys, but for whatever reason, they just didn't want to talk about reptilians.
I actually, sorry about that, Chris. I actually came across them because of Credo Mutwa.
Yeah, David Icke did a lengthy, I think did something like a 6-hour DVD with Credo Mutwa. And again, he talks about how, I mean, in their culture, once Christianity arrived, all that, and you can say the same for any sort of the ancient civilizations that were, well, in this case Christianity or any other religion, if you like, took over and wiped out, and all the shamans and all the, because this again goes back to witches and all that sort of thing, and the medicine men, any information that related to the men in power, the men pulling the strings behind the scene, was quickly gotten rid of, and only the chosen few were aware of it, and often the chosen few were those in carrying the bloodline. And that's sort of the thing, of course you guys know that's how a lot of this works.
Everything has to do with bloodlines, and it's carried forward that way even to this day. I was listening to a broadcast from the United States, and they were actually talking about bloodlines and about time travel as well, and we'll probably get into this when we get more into your documentary. But I'm trying to remember the fellow's name. It will come to me. But what he was mentioning was the fact that there was time travel going on back in the 1970s. It was a whole program that was done. Barack Obama was supposedly part of this program that was being done, and it was everything to do with bloodlines. In other words, the Bush family. You start getting into, as you say, the Illuminati and the New World Order. They were told early in the piece that they were to be presidents of the United States, both senior and junior, and they knew what was coming. So once again, we're talking about bloodlines. And then, as you were just talking about with the Archons, if you go back in time, immemorial, go back to the time of the shamans, go back to the time of the rishis and the sages of old, what would happen was information was hidden. Information was kept from the masses because that was where the power was. And so what's going on with the work that you're doing now is very important, and bringing a documentary like this out is very important, especially using people like you described before, the people that are not necessarily in the mainstream media, and by mainstream media I mean the David Ickes and people like that are well known. Jordan Maxwell went through a very, very difficult time and was done the down and out, but he's now trying to come back as well. But there are other people who remained hidden, for lack of a better term, and those people have a lot of information that if that got out into the mainstream could cause a lot of problems. So I can understand by you going and talking to those type of people for your documentary, it's going to bring out fresh information, it's going to bring out new information from different sources, and that will pique the interest of a lot of people out there.
Oh yes, well that's my hope. The difficult part of it often is getting those people on side.
Yeah.
Because particularly in the alternative scene, there's a lot of paranoia going around, there's a lot of bandwagon jumping, huge trust issues, which of course is all manipulation from the agents working behind the scenes as well, because as you know, it's listed, the alternative scene is now listed with that as well.
Divide and conquer.
And again, this is always the case. I don't know often when I'm looking at people that aren't as widely known as David and Jordan and James, who these guys are. I can only trust what I read about them, what I can find about them, and vice versa. They must wonder who I am and the right to do so. So often it takes a long months and months of conversing via email to sort of gain the trust or not from these guys, because often they're getting emails about the project that are totally untrue, and all I can do is my best to sort of get them on side. But ultimately, I think I've done very well, and it's come together very nicely. There was a couple of people I'm still really trying to get involved, but I totally respect them, the privacy, and if they want to just continue with their own work, then that's cool. It would be great because it's an opportunity to sort of collate all the work and get it in one piece. I say one piece. This it's gone into a trilogy and way beyond now. But there are now people contacting me, and I'm getting all sorts of calls from all sorts of people about areas, and it's really tricky because I'm sort of, although I made this film with Daniel Rogerson, he's a 3D artist, and he gets work, and he can't, because I'm a visual effects artist by trade, and a video editor. So the alternative filmmaking is sort of like it started as a hobby, if you like, but I've sort of, don't tell the wife, but I sort of commit all my time to it now, and the visual effects project now, and I've worked on shows like Doctor Who and Bedlam, some British stuff over here, and I think I got fed up with it. I got quite bored with it because this stuff's way more interesting. So often as well, that's something I meant to mention, when you have sort of ties to, even in a minor capacity like a visual effects artist, and you've worked on mainstream TV, that can go against you, even though you've just done some visual effects work. If people see you linked to mainstream, that can really put people off. And I found that, and that's such a shame. But I'm hoping that the longer this goes on, and the more that the name of the project and my name gets thrown around, that people will come on board and tell us what they know. And what I'm trying to do in the project as well is, of course, I have to edit this thing, but the idea is to really let the information guide the project, and that's probably why it has turned into such. This could be. Currently, it's 3 pieces. It's probably going to go to 4 or 5.
Chris, I've got an interesting question for you. In regards to your documentary, now, like you said earlier, how long's a piece of string? You could have taken this in many different directions, and like you just said, you wanted to tell the story and just present the facts and come across impartial and let the information come to the surface and let people process that in their own way, which is great. With all the interviews that you've done so far and the information that your interviewees have given over and shared with you, and the experiences that you've had in listening to their stories, did any of them actually have information that not just correlated but complemented and each other's stories and bits and pieces of the jigsaw to this big puzzle?
Well, yeah, I would say that, the obvious ones are probably James Bartley and David Icke, But that, those guys have been researching around 25 years, both of them, so I can understand why that would happen, and that wasn't such a surprise, if I'm honest. But what I think a lot of the experience this research ties together, I think that's the sort of the cement for me in this project that holds the whole thing together, is that you've got both people that have had sort of traumatic abduction experiences and people that are having very positive experiences, but yet both acknowledging that, the other exists, if you like. Because what I didn't plan for when I got into this was the fact that there was going to be a very, I thought it was going to be a very doom and gloom sort of project, and that, often David Icke and James Bell get a really hard time for sort of looking into the dark areas of this. But they do look at the positive stuff. And then when I met Mary Rudwell, who is a therapist and a counsellor for ET experiences, when she started to divulge some of the information that some of her clients were giving her and related to some of the experiences they had had, and that tied into some of the negative experiences, all basically being presence of the reptilian act, and the military, of course, as well, in some of these abductions, with the MyLabs, if you like. That was a very interesting correlation there. The fact that the reptilians were working with a number of groups, the Greys and the Mantids in particular. I mean, the Greys are often used as the hard labour, if you like, but as you guys probably know, there are countless species of Greys anyway. So that was a hard one to sort of get your head around, but yeah, as you say, the information about the reptilians and the military and the alliances with various races was very interesting to me. And again, all this just led to more research, and then, and of course, meeting more researchers and speaking to different people. So I would say that including the experiences, which was an absolute must really in this project, was key, and that is what's holding it together, and that is what is sort of, for me, is causing some furore. There's a lot of I'm getting a lot of good feedback, which I'm not really used to. So that's great. And of course, you're going to get those guys that have got questions, and are you going to include channelers? Are you going to include psychics? And as I said before, I've only got so much time to do that, so I'm trying to please everybody, which is not easy.
Would I be right in saying, Chris, that I guess your next step after this project would be determined based on who's come forward and contacted you in regards to what kind of experiences with what kind of entities over what kind of time period?
Well, I guess that's a tricky one, really, because in the infancy of the project, we didn't. In my blog on YouTube, I talk about how we had a brief written out, and of course we were a little bit naive at that point. So the questions that we'd put out to 10 or 11 people featured in the documentary, we asked them a pile of questions. I mean, hours. I mean, I've got hours and hours of hundreds of hours of footage that interestingly cover the areas I didn't even know that I was going to get into, which is great, because it makes the editing a little bit easier. But yeah, you're right. I mean, because you're coming across new information and people are now contacting me, that is definitely going to guide the way that part 2 and part 3 go, and that's going to tell the story, which is what I think is exciting a lot of people, because they know that by featuring the people we are, that the project is going to be, it's going to go, sort of got a life of its own, if you like. I'm not sort of manipulating the information. Of course, I've said before, people, when I contact people in the emails, we converse and we gain this trust of one another, but they're always very wary about the content. How is it going to be edited? What's going to be left out? That's their main concern, and all I can do is get them to trust that I'll put the information out, or as much of it as I can, in its raw form.
Beyond
Well, that's the thing. If you can put it out in the raw form, that's all they really can ask for. Now, you did mention her, and we just literally interviewed her, Mary Rudwell. And a very nice lady, and she's up in Queensland here in Australia. And in talking with her, I found, she does a lot of work with children and a lot of work with the star kids and the, what do they call them, the indigo kids and things along those lines. And it was very interesting information. But what you said, I think, is very pertinent and important. The experiencers, because what tends to happen is when we do any kind of work in this field, we always look for the so-called experts and the leaders, and those experts have an agenda. You mentioned earlier when in talking to people they wanted to know certain information from you before they might agree to an interview with you. It's the same for us here at Beyond 3D. When we talk to people, they want to know exactly what our agenda is, what we're going to portray. So I can imagine what you went through in dealing with this, because even in the so-called mainstream area of ufology or the mainstream area of archaeology, there's infighting. They had a program called Contact in the Desert out in Joshua Tree in California, and when people were invited to this conference, they were asking the organizers, all right, if this person is coming, I'm not coming, or if that person is coming, I don't want to be sat next to this person or this person. There's a lot of infighting going on there, so you have to walk a very fine line, and a lot of times you're coming at it blind because you don't know who is up to what and why. So I can totally understand why it would take, first of all, a heck of a lot longer to get a documentary like this out because of literally the logistics end of it alone. What you're basically saying is it sounds a lot like you've gotten what most people in the area of ufology and archaeology and cryptozoology get. It's very, very difficult, and in a sense, the people who are established in these fields, they want you, especially if you're new or they don't know you, your name is not out there quite yet, they want you to earn your stripes or earn your dues as well. So they might put you through the ringer a bit. So the fact that you were able to get to the point where you have, you should be commended for it. As far as your information is concerned and what you're putting out there, I think it's extremely important that you try your best to edit it in such a way where all of the information gets out. Because if you talk to a person like a Mary Rodwell especially, and she was nice enough to share information with you, I think you would owe it to yourself more than even to her to make sure that all of that information gets out so people get to see the entire picture, what's going on out there. It's very, very important. So I'm really appreciating the work you're doing here and what you're trying to get out there, and we can totally commiserate with just how hard doing something like this is. It's a big feat.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. I just wish everybody on YouTube did.
Well, look, you're going to have people. You're putting the information out there, which means you have courage to do it. Everyone is going to have their own opinion. They're always going to. You know darn well there are people out there, especially in the internet, where you can be relatively anonymous. There are going to be people out there that are going to be very, very hard and very, very critical. So tough skin as far as that kind of stuff is concerned. But you're doing the work, and that is something. So as they say, if all publicity is good publicity, let them talk and let the chips fall where they may. You're putting out the work. You're putting out the truth. That is the experience people have, and that is really all you can do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that was, and that would be my sort of advice for anyone else, because I'm always looking to get if there's anyone interested in getting information out on a more professional sort of format. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people start off in YouTube, and then they will move on to sort of a slightly higher end product if they can. I mean, I know how difficult it is. I'm sort of funding this thing out of my own pocket. But that's what I really encourage people to do, to get out there and like you've just said, and given my experience sort of working on sort of mainstream projects and TV shows and stuff like that, I hadn't really been criticised before. It was quite a shock, if I'm honest. I mean, it's probably a little bit naive as well, because I had been around the alternative scene for quite some time, really, in one capacity or another. But when it's personal, it's never, I've sort of never been around in a personal nature before. When they're attacking you personally, without you knowing, without knowing you, and it sort of gets to you at first. I mean, we're only human. It's sort of, my initial reaction was, why am I bothering? Sort of trying to get this information out there. And then, like you said, it does come full circle, and you think, well, wait a minute, I've been doing this for 6 months, a year, or whatever. But a lot of these guys have spent their lives doing that, and I sort of owe it to them to continue and get this information out there. So that's kind of what happened, and now it's sort of like water off a duck's back. And you need, like you said, you need to grow thick skin, don't you?
Yeah, what an awesome attitude to have too, Chris. That's fantastic.
That's exactly what it's
you've
about.
not really got a choice.
Well, if you want to get the work out there, that's part of the game, and that's the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, now with your documentary in and of itself, I want to get into a little bit to exactly what the information is without giving a lot of things away because it will be out ultimately. Being that you got to interview a lot of the people, I don't want to necessarily talk about the people that are well known in the area. Of the people that you considered the fringe or that are more well known, let's say in the forums out there, what information did you receive, or which person did you interview that impressed you the most?
Well, I would say one of the more interesting stories from one of the lesser known guys in the project is a guy called Richard Bruce. And Richard Bruce has been doing shape-shifting videos, reptilian shape-shifting videos on YouTube. Now, automatically, that sort of raises an eyebrow for anyone, even those of us that are aware of what's going on, because that subject itself is, wow, I mean, if you type shape-shifting into any forum, you know, just kick it off and watch World War III start on the forums there about shape-shifting, because it's such a controversial subject, and so little is known about it. But when I saw this guy's videos, and not only it wasn't necessarily the videos. I mean, the videos are very interesting. But what I came across was a video of him being harassed by the police, and his story was that he was uploading these shape-shifting videos, and that he was receiving a lot of negative attention from the police. And then he put a video out there of a helicopter right above his apartment. And the police are looking right down on him, and there's small UFO spy-orbs flying around the helicopter, and that was what really got my attention. And I thought there's something to this. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, you're having to trust this guy's information, and that's always the hard part. But that video really hit home, and it isn't the only one. He's since made many more of aerial harassment. And along with that goes many stories of the police actually knocking on his door and harassing him. So when that's happening, I thought this guy's story is, you know, really interesting. I need to speak to this guy and find out what it's all about. And then what happened is then you open a can of worms with the whole shape-shifting, because in the film, Richard and other people like Richard on YouTube do a lot of work on mainstream film and looking for shape-shifting in mainstream film. And of course, I'm never going to get permission to show any of that in Don't Mention the Reptilians. It's just not going to happen. So it became really difficult then to sort of get across what he was talking about. I mean, we do this section on shape-shifting, but what's happened from that is we're going to, Richard and I and some other researchers, we're going to put together a YouTube video specifically on shape-shifting, which is probably going to end up being 2 or 3 hours long. So that's the sort of thing that's happened with this. There are areas of it because of copyright that we can't necessarily do justice, but by using sort of fair use rights, we can do that through a medium like YouTube. So yeah, Richard Bruce was a very interesting character, but the harassment with him is going on to this day. So yeah, there's clearly something to it, and the harassment isn't anything new. I mean, most of the guys in the film have received harassment and threats of one kind or another.
Well, those kind of harassment threats, there's a whole other documentary, isn't it? It's like an investigative documentary for you to go that way if you're tired of focusing on the reptilians for a while.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because Don't Mention the Reptilians, although, like I said, it was specifically about the reptilians, once you get to the crux of it, you realise there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. It isn't just the reptilians, there's a number of alliances forming around just the reptilians. There's the Archon, the Mantids, and then there's the military, which, to me, that's probably the most dangerous area, the military aspect of this to look into.
Chris, sorry, Chris, to interrupt. A quick question: do you find that, or everything that you know so far about who's involved and who the players are, do you find that everything is self-serving?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer, because in some respects, yeah. But there's what I didn't count for was the factions within factions, and it makes you wonder where our military got that from. I wonder, but I mean that's sort of what's happening in the military and with these aerospace companies that get involved, and with the Navy, the Army. There are various factions within the Navy and the Army, and other black projects that are all sort of doing the infighting that you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. So there's all that aspect to cover as well. So I think what we can gauge from that is that it can't all be negative. That there's clearly sort of positive elements of the military trying to expose some of this, and we see that in small pockets with whistleblowers, etc. But a lot of that goes unseen, and it has to go unseen. But me talking about that is really tricky, because you're looking at speaking to whistleblowers who really don't want to appear on camera. So again, that's difficult. People are going to sort of have to take, not necessarily my word, but the researchers that have met these guys, they're going to have to take their word for some of that information. And we know that some of that information will be absolutely littered with business. And of course that works vice versa as well with that principle. Disinformation always has an element of truth. So yeah, that's tricky.
Chris, how deep does the rabbit hole go?
Well, currently I don't know.
It's got to that point where you just too much energy it's going to involve to actually contemplate how the tentacles of the entire situation and how they branch out.
No, not. I wouldn't say that. I would say I'm fortunate, and a lot of the groundwork has already gone. Most of the groundwork has already been done by people like Ellis Taylor and James Bartley and David Icke. Peter Glass has done some work too, some great work with his own personal experience. And Mary, as you've met Mary. They're all doing their own parts and what they can is sharing that information. But getting to, I don't know how deep this stuff goes. I'm already surprised by. Every day I get surprised by new information, but at the same time you do, as well as developing a thick skin, the new information sometimes isn't that shocking. You sort of come to some of it, you sort of, well, yeah, I kind of expected that, and that you subconsciously sort of start connecting this stuff before it happens. But I would say that many people talk about this whole alien invasion, don't they, this whole disclosure project. I think that's something to certainly keep an eye on at the moment. I don't think it's necessarily going to unfold the way that people think it will with a fake invasion, because that's sort of too public now. I'm not saying that wouldn't work on the masses, it certainly would, but I think there's a lot of information out there, and I think that a lot of that is disinformation. So, but something has to happen, it will, and has to happen. But it'll be interesting to see how this thing unfolds, and hopefully there's more researchers actually coming out of the woodwork now. That, as you say, I mean, it's interesting. Some of these researchers, when they sort of come out with new information, the new names on the scene, if you like, a lot of people assume that these guys have been researching for a couple of years, and what I found is that they've actually been doing it for decades, and that they've been sitting on the information. I don't know, some of them have been waiting for the right time, and some of them have just found that they can no longer sit on it, and it's really important. These are often the whistleblower types and the ex-military or ex-servicemen that just refuse and can sort of see what's coming. So yeah, how deep does it go? I don't know. I really don't know. Deep.
Well, Chris, being that you mentioned the military, I'll take it that way for a little while, is the major case that most people talk about now, and I don't know whether you were able to interview anybody in the documentary about it or anything like that, would be the Rendlesham Forest incident over in England and things along those lines, where the military was actually there It had different people experience a ship or a craft land there. They touched it, so there was a tactile aspect to it, and even in that aspect there, they classified things to the point where 30 years later, guys still weren't able to really talk about it and get all of the information out there. And if anyone actually, that was in the military, actually did try to whistleblow, what happened to them was they lost their pensions, they lost any kind of benefits they would get, and that is enough to usually keep people quiet. So in this documentary, in your travels and doing your research, did you run across anybody that dealt in that area, Rendlesham?
Not necessarily, but I do sort of attend a lot of conferences in Britain, and I have come across the people that do talk about Rendlesham, because of course people like to compare that to the Roswell incident in sort of Britain, Roswell if you like, and it isn't all that different when you look at it. Like you said, the tactics that they used to sort of keep this information secret, I mean, there's no limit to the length they'll go to keep it secret. And of course, all that does.
They have a reason.
Yeah,
for it.
I mean, absolutely. All that does is sort of prick our ears up, and we think, well, there's obviously something more to this.
You know, that literally ties back to what you just said earlier about the fact that we were talking about some of the researches you went through, and they hold the information for a very long period of time.
Oh yeah, that was to validate. Not to validate. Sorry. I just went mentally blank then too.
What you said, Chris, made sense to me, and then all of a sudden I'm trying to tie it back to something earlier, and it'll come to me.
That's all right.
It'll come to me, but one day it'll come to me.
All right, Chris.
We'll go forward from here.
We'll go forward from
here.
back.
That's no problem.
Matt's pretty good. He'll snap it back in a sec.
All right. No worries.
Your opinion on the reptilians: interdimensional or extra-dimensional?
I would say, from what I can tell, both and more. I would say about that. I would say, although we like to think that we know quite a lot about them, I would say that we know very little still. And that just goes to show the level of secrecy surrounding it. Which, as you were saying earlier, that leads me to think that there's something. You mentioned how deep this goes. The secrecy involved in this just leads me to think that there's something that we haven't uncovered yet. There's something deeper. What that is, I have at this point no idea. But just the level of secrecy surrounding just the reptilians, and it's a really strange. When you're in and around it and you're talking to people about this, it's really bizarre. It doesn't matter how much sort of history and ancient text you sort of look at and research and uncover. Yes, that stuff's important, absolutely, and it's sort of very valid evidence. But modern day evidence, you try and find something. You try and find. Even they've gone to such lengths with the experiences now, and this is interesting. The counsellors and sort of people that regress experiences have always known that there have been sort of layers of memories put on top to hide what's beneath that. And early on, I think in the research, they assumed that by peeling back one false memory, what lay beneath that one false memory was the truth. And because they had no experience of it, they had nothing else to go on. They didn't really know how complex the programming was. And what we found is that often there are dozens of layers of false memories implanted in the experiences. And that in itself, to hide, what are they hiding? I mean, like you said, there's the star seeding and the breeding programs and the hybrid breeding programs. You know, that's no secret. We can sort of get our heads around it to some degree. If you look at the sort of reptilian and the Anunnaki stuff in the ancient text, yeah, you can sort of understand if they manipulated the human genome millions or thousands of years ago. Fair enough. You know, we can sort of understand that. It makes sense that very little is known about our DNA. But there is just something else. The lens that they're going to with the experiences and the abductees to hide it. What is it that they're hiding? I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and this is sort of why this film got made. I mean, obviously at that point, I didn't know but it's just spurring me on. It's, you know, there are times, of course, when it starts going, sort of getting your head around all this, particularly on your own when you're trying to the editing process and research projects. I'm doing a lot of this on my own. So it gets to a point where you have to say that you don't know, and then be honest that yes, I don't know, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. I'd rather say that than make something up and guess at something at this point.
We appreciate your honesty for that Chris. That was a great answer.
No, I mean, I've been in and around the alternative scene enough to know when people are doing that, and people don't appreciate that. And ultimately, it will come back and bite you on the backside. So you're better off not doing that and just being honest and upfront as you can.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Chris, with this interview. We here at Beyond 3D appreciate everything that you've done tonight and everything you've spoken about. And your documentary, Don't Mention the Reptilians, comes out when here in Australia, do you think?
Well, this is the big question. It's with the dispute, and it's my fault, hands up, that it's been delayed. But it is for the benefit of the project because more research and more films are coming. So as soon as what I would suggest people do is people keep an eye on my YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing an update actually this week. I'm hoping to have a date for them this week. So basically, I'm just waiting for a date from the distributor on when it's coming out. And I just apologise for it being a little late, that's all. But yeah, thanks, Clint and Matt. Thanks for having me on today. I've really appreciated it. I've enjoyed it.
Chris, no problem whatsoever. And what we will do is, when this goes to air, we will get it up on our Facebook page. We will keep in contact with you going forward to make sure that if there's anything that comes out that you need to get out to the public here in Australia, we'll be able to help you do that as best we can. And it's an open door thing as far as we're concerned. We're willing to work with people who are out there taking the risk and trying to get really great information out to people. So being that you fit that category in spades, we will do our best to make sure that any work that you're doing gets out into the public domain as far as we're concerned. So we greatly appreciate what you've done, and we thank you for your time.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Chris. Have a great day.
Okay.
All the best,
guys.
Chris.
Thank you very
Bye-bye
much.
now.
Bye-bye.
Beyond 3D. Since we recorded this interview with Chris 7 months ago, the title of his documentary has been changed from Don't Mention the Reptilians to that of Alien Reptile Legacy, due to the worldwide distribution rights for this documentary. So if you're searching on YouTube for more information, just punch in either titles, Don't Mention the Reptilians or Alien Reptile Legacy. Next weekend, Chris is also holding in the United Kingdom a convention titled RepCon on the 29th of May 2016. If any of our UK listeners want further information on either Chris's documentary or the RepCon convention, go to Chris's website, www.don'tmentionthereptilians.com. That's all we have time for this week on Beyond 3D. We welcome all new listeners to join our Facebook page, Beyond 3D, and that can be found in Facebook as Beyond, the number 3, a hyphen, and the letter D, where we regularly post other information that we refer to on our show. Be sure to return next week when Matt and I aim to present to you more insight on the world around us that is seen, unseen, and beyond the third dimension. Good night, everyone, and until next week, take care.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.